I am joined today by Lewis Bollard. He leads the Open Philanthropy strategy for farm animal welfare. Prior to joining Open Philanthropy, he worked as a policy advisor and international liaison to the CEO at the Humane Society, and is also a nice guy because I previously scheduled him with another guest named Lewis and had to bump it back 2 weeks, and he was completely rolling with it. So it's nice to see you for real, Lewis.
Thanks, Eden. It's great to be on the show.
Thank you. Well, I'm excited to talk to you about this topic because this is just kind of a topic that's not part of my regular purview. I feel like most of the time I'm looking at political economy stuff and I'm saying this will work or this won't work. And when I'm getting into more philosophical things like rights, I'm talking about like rights that human beings get. And we all kind of agree all humans get rights. There's not a lot of debate there. And so now we're in this kind of untrammeled territory for me because I haven't thought a lot about what the role of the government is with animals. But I really like animals. So I'm open to this and would love to talk to you about it. So off the cuff, are you opposed to are you opposed to us eating animals legally in any situation, or is your goal to just kind of reduce suffering overall? Is this a utilitarian project you're working on, or like a moral crusade? How should we interpret the rest of the conversation?
My goal is very much to reduce the suffering of animals. I think we all share common values about liking animals, not wanting them to suffer. And really my goal is the project of trying to extend those intuitions to say if we don't want dogs and cats to suffer, we shouldn't want pigs and chickens to suffer either. And I think there's often a pretty small trade-off to ensure that those animals don't need to suffer in the way they are currently.
Okay, good. Off to a good start. And can I ask you, because I feel like a lot of the time folks listening in the red states tend to associate animal welfare as kind of a Team Blue talking point. I was thinking about it prior to discussing things with you, and I don't think I have any ethical problem with hunting. Like, I feel like hunting is probably the most humane way to acquire meat because the animals are just running around until they get a quick death. Like, for the hunters listening, do you have any problem with them?
No, I mean, I think I agree with you that for someone who's a good hunter, a good shot, they can kill an animal cleanly, and ideally they're eating that animal and they're eating it as an alternative to factory farmed meat. Then that certainly seems ethically preferable to me to eating factory farmed meat and having someone else treat an animal in a worse way.
Fantastic. We've just mollified several of my relatives that are listening that now know that their hunting will not be taken away from them. And in fact, they might be more ethical than me, the city slicker that's eating a hamburger on a regular basis. So let's then shift the ethical ire to me, the guy that doesn't hunt. Who has no idea how to do it and doesn't really understand the causal chain between the hamburger I eat and the cow. I don't really know what happens in the meantime. So could you kind of give me an idea, what are the conditions like in factory farming here in the United States or where we get our meat from?
Yeah, sure. So it depends on the species. Cows actually have it kind of the best of all animals in terms of beef cattle. They're still primarily raised on a ranch. They end up at a feedlot, which is not a pretty place, but that's only for the last month of their life, and then they go through the slaughter chain. For chickens and pigs, it looks a lot more industrial. So chickens and pigs are raised on large-scale factory farms where they will never go outside. In the case of breeding sows, which are the mother pigs, they are raised in crates permanently, crates the same size as their body. So these are coffin-sized crates. They move from one crate to another crate to give birth, and then back to the other crate to be pregnant again. And that's their entire life. The same thing for egg-laying hens. They're kept in these tiny cages about the size of a microwave. They cram about 5 to 6 hens into each of them. And again, that's how it is for 1 to 2 years until they go off to slaughter. So what you see across each of these industries is kind of they found the most efficient possible way to raise these animals if you don't care at all about the interests of the animal.
Okay, so this is fascinating because we're already off to a different direction than I thought we were going to go. I would assume that if I was looking to, I'll back up. If I was making an XY axis of what I feel comfortable eating, one of the axes would be how emotionally aware is this animal, how intelligent is it, but I would specifically be interested in how capable is it of experiencing pain. And then the other axis would be how much pain is inflicted upon it. So theoretically, according to my dictum that I just threw out here, if a blue whale dropped dead from a heart attack, I don't know if whales have heart attacks, but if it dropped dead from a heart attack, I'd feel weird eating it, but I wouldn't find it ethically reprehensible. But I would feel very bad about eating a cow that was tortured, for example. Like if, again, in the hunting analogy, if if great uncle Richard comes home with a bunch of venison that he shot, like, I think it's fine. I wouldn't want to torture that deer, but also the deer just died like very quickly, right? So when I'm looking at like cows, I would feel worse about eating a cow than a chicken, because I think I'm fairly in the clear in saying that cows are a lot smarter than chickens. Chickens are a lot dumber than cows. So my inclination would be, if I wanted to reduce the suffering I was inflicting upon the world, eat less cow, eat more chicken. But it sounds like if we're looking at the suffering scale, cows have it better than chickens do.
That's right. That's right. So cows definitely have a better life than chickens in the modern farming system. A lot of cattle are still raised outdoors. It's actually quite hard to factory farm a cow, and they've been kind of lucky because of that. They've largely been kept out on the range.
Thank God, because my uncle is a cattle rancher, so this is great. I'm already I haven't been kicked out of Thanksgiving yet. This is fantastic. Please continue.
That's right. So really, the ruminants in general, the grass-eating animals, more likely to be kept out on the range, out on the pastures. The non-ruminant animals like pigs and chickens are really the ones who have been kind of doomed to be factory farmed. The other factor I'd consider is how big are these animals. So you mentioned you'd rather eat a chicken, but if you eat chicken regularly, you're eating a lot more than one chicken, whereas you'd eat a lot fewer cows. So there's about 200 chickens worth of meat in a cow.
Oh wow!
So you need to think both the number of animals
or 200 cows in a whale. Like if we can actually get the cruelty-free whales, I should go that direction.
That's right. Yeah, if you're so inclined, this argument leads to interesting places. But I do think for me the most salient factor is how are these animals treated, and that's where I think you really come back to focusing in on the chicken industry, the egg industry, the pork industry as the industries that are keeping animals in the worst conditions.
Okay, all right, fascinating. So, and I just want to make sure that I understand this. If we're trying to quantify suffering, there's more suffering going on with pigs and chickens than there is with cows, and because there's more meat in a cow than pigs or chickens, the amount of just animals of individual units of animals that are suffering is much greater. So. If I just as a consumer in my own life wanted to be a little bit nicer to the world, it would actually be better for me to eat like a hamburger once a week than to eat a chicken twice a week or something. We could work out the scale here, but in general, though, a little bit of beef would be better than a little bit of chicken.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I mean, I'll tell you a personal story. I grew up with a family farm, and we had cattle and sheep on that farm. I really think they had pretty good lives. They would roam across the pasture. They would be able to kind of frolic around, do their own cattle and sheep things. And, then they obviously would end up at slaughter. Whereas, when I've walked into a chicken factory farm or an egg factory farm, it's just really hard to see how those animals have lives worth living. It's really hard to see how they have kind of a life that we could feel good
plus,
about.
On top of that, so the chickens are kept in a cage the size of a microwave. The pigs are kept in a pork coffin. All of this sounds horrible to me. On top of that, too, don't we... Cows we have genetically engineered to some extent by breeding them over the last few centuries to produce a lot of meat, but they can still walk around. They can still go talk to their cow buddy, chew cud, kind of maybe frolic. I don't know. I don't really know a lot about cows, to be honest with you. But with chickens, we've engorged them to where they can't even walk. Am I right in thinking that we're eating mutant chickens at this point that even if they were cage free are having a bad life?
That's right. That's right. So particularly for the meat chickens, the egg-laying hens and the meat chickens are actually totally different breeds at this point. But the ones raised for meat, you absolutely got on the point that the genetics are their primary problem. So we've bred them now to grow about 8 times faster than they did just 60 or 70 years ago. And in particular, the parts of the body that we want to grow faster are the valuable breast meat. It's the thigh meat. We don't want their whole skeleton to grow faster, and we certainly don't want their lungs and other kind of worthless parts of the animals to grow faster. So you've got these mutant animals that by the time they reach slaughter can barely walk. They end up they're living essentially on unfortunately the feces of the rest of the flock and the prior flocks, and so they end up just lying down flat in that, and they end up with burns all over their body. So when you see one of these animals when it goes to slaughter, it's basically a whole bunch of big blisters. Okay. And that's what we've done with the genetics. And thankfully, as you say, cattle really don't have it. We haven't managed to do that to cattle. They can still walk. They can still run. And so, yeah, that genetic piece it's hard to kind of imagine and capture what we've done to these chickens. But it's a major problem.
I did not bring you on to make me vegetarian, but I might give up chicken by the end of this. It sounds like I'll add. I live in Austin, Texas. There's really, really tasty food here, and I went. for months I'd been thinking I want to go vegetarian for a month just to see how difficult it is, to see what my body's like. And I mentioned this to my then girlfriend, and she's like, "You did that last month." And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "Yeah, do you not remember this?" And it was so low impact on me in Austin, Texas, because you could get vegetarian alternatives and things. So, all right, I think you've convinced me to give up chicken. I think I'm gonna we're gonna circle back to this, because if I can get like that sketch. Have you seen that sketch from Portlandia? I'll put it in here where we're like, we know the chicken's name. It's Derek. He was given a very good life. Then I'll eat the chicken, right? But I think with the factory farm stuff, he's throwing me off of. Well, then the noting that cows have a decent life, and I was at my Uncle Dan's place over Christmas, and that was kind of my conclusion driving around. I was like, unless the cows need musical instruments or something, they seem to just want to stand around a field, and that's what he's letting them do. When it gets to the slaughter, though, I would like to think that the cow is gently brought into a room, and he lays down, and then like that scene from Soylent Green, the cow gets to watch green pastures, and it slowly nods off to sleep. For slaughter, for reality, I would be most concerned that it be very quick, and that the animal not have a prolonged awareness of what's about to happen. So, like, the worst case scenario for me would be if all of the cows are on a conveyor belt, they can smell the death, and then they're like bludgeoned multiple times with a baseball bat or something. That would be the worst case scenario. I have no idea. Are they guillotined? What happens to cows?
I've got good news for you on cattle at slaughter, which is thanks primarily to the work of Temple Grandin, who you may have heard of. She's
kind of the autistic animal rights proponent, right?
That's right. And so she has redesigned almost all the cattle slaughterhouses in the country.
Wow.
From the perspective of what she thinks it might be like to be a cow. And as a result, she's managed to kind of take out everything scary. She has these curved chutes so they don't know what they're walking up toward. And I've seen this, and honestly, I think the cattle have no clue what's coming. They're hit with a captive bolt stunner, which knocks them out very quickly. And then they die. And so I actually think that, as far as animal welfare goes, cattle slaughter has been a major success. Now, unfortunately, that's not true for chickens. It's not as true for pigs. But there are a few bright spots there.
This is such a weird episode. I'm now pro beef, like in a way that I thought at the end of the episode I was going to go, damn it, and throw my coffee mug at the ground and go, I'm vegan now. I think I'm weirdly more okay with beef than I was at the beginning of this conversation, but more opposed to a chicken and pigs. That so my personal thing that I do is I don't eat pigs, or I very rarely eat pigs. If somebody makes me a meal and there's pork in it, I'll eat it, because it's not a religious thing. It's just I really love dogs, and it's my understanding that pigs are as smart as dogs. So I typically avoid that. If I accidentally order a pizza and it has some Italian ingredient that includes pork, I'll eat it. Again, it's not a religious thing, but 99% of the time I'm not eating pork. Because again, my understanding is that the pigs are just as emotionally intelligent and just intelligent in general as dogs. And so I can't, in my world, ethically do anything to a pig that I wouldn't do to a dog. Is this about right, or can you now relieve that and say, no, pigs are dumb as shit? You can eat them. They're assholes. They hate each other. You would feel comfortable eating a pig.
No, I wish I could set your mind at rest, but I think you're right to think that pigs are probably smarter than dogs. They've trained pigs to play video games, having sort of seen some pigs, they can do some pretty clever things. So no, I share your view. I mean, I think for me, the intelligence piece may be a little less important. I mean, I think when we're talking about suffering, I think that's a pretty basic form of intelligence required to suffer, and a pretty basic form of intelligence required to feel fear or pain. But certainly it doesn't help when an animal can also experience maybe more complex emotions like loneliness or some sense of boredom and that kind of thing.
Okay, so I'm probably overweighing like ability to do math problems or like solve puzzles and things. Like if it were a particularly stupid chimp that wasn't very good at using straw to get ants, I wouldn't be okay with like beating it for fun or anything like that. So maybe awareness of pain, awareness of suffering. Okay. And then to round it up on the slaughtering bit, so it's not that bad for cows, but for pigs and chickens, like can you kind of tell me what it looks like for a pig?
Sure. Yeah. So I've visited pig slaughterhouses, and unfortunately, partly because pigs are very smart, they haven't found a way to kill them without them knowing what's coming, and so they they communicate it back through the set of pigs, and they do try and electrically stun them. They try and kind of get them with electric tongs around the ears, but it's very hard to grab a squealing, running pig. And so, not only do they not always manage to get them right, there are a lot of cases of pigs waking up in the process too. And so they've been improperly stunned, and then, they wake up while they're being disassembled. So it's not the prettiest look. The latest move is they've tried to move toward gassing pigs. And I think in theory this could be done right, but in practice it doesn't look so pretty either. So if anyone's curious, you can look at some videos.
Well, there's some very good reasons why gassing is gonna strike people as a bad thing based on some historical things that happened. But the idea behind that, if I'm to understand it, would be that we're going to give them like knockout gas or chloroform, or alternately whatever they give you at the dentist that makes you laugh, something to just kind of ease them out. That way they're asleep or very, very sedated when they're killed.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'd be very lucky to get a laughing gas. That would add a whole new element to slaughter. But no, I think more commonly they're looking at using carbon dioxide, which is a widely available gas. The hope is that it knocks them out relatively quickly. And yeah, as you say, I mean, I think gassing doesn't have positive associations for most people. But it is the case that certainly, for instance, with chicken slaughter, where they currently are hanging them upside down and then dunking them in an electrified bath and hoping that will knock them out. Gassing would be an improvement. I mean, candidly, it would be better if they could just, sit in a little box and be knocked out than if they were dunked upside down and electrocuted water.
Wait,
so
why do they? So with chickens, they like grab them by the feet and they dunk them in like electrified water. So there's like kind of the idea is just we're going to short circuit their brain very quickly before we cut them up.
Yeah, that's right. Well, they've created a whole production chain around it. So they basically have a whole lot of workers who are grabbing the chickens upside down, clamming them into shackles by their legs. Now, fortunately, their legs often get broken in that process. So then they're getting dunked upside down in an electrified bath of water. And here's where you get into the crazy technical details of this. But you've got a trade-off there between, do you want high voltage or high current? And one of these is going to knock the birds out, but it's going to leave some scarring on the meat. And the other one's not going to knock the birds out, but it's not going to leave scarring on the meat. So in Europe, they use the one that actually knocks the birds out. In the US, we use the one that's better for meat quality.
Wow.
And so you've got these birds that are half knocked out. Then they ideally go from an automatic blade that cuts their neck off. But if they happen to duck or if they happen to squirm around at all, they make it live past that step. And then they end up in the scalding tank. And the USDA actually records every year how many of these birds are fully alive when they make it to the scalding tank. And it's about 1 million birds. So, the industry says, well, that's a small fraction of the birds we slaughter, but it's still not the best thing when about 1 million birds are ending up in that circumstance every year.
Okay. So if reincarnation is a thing, don't go for chicken. Chicken is not.
That's right. That's the takeaway.
Go for Labrador Retriever. Go for grizzly bear. Don't go for that. What about? I also don't really have an idea of. Okay, when I think of farmer, I have in my head a little boy cartoon understanding of a farmer. When I hear farmer, right, I think of guy in cowboy hat walking around 20-acre property. When I hear factory farm, I think of a giant warehouse a la Tyson's. And then when I hear like farm to table, I just picture like very affluent white people in Portland that have a like side gig raising chickens. So what if we were looking at a pie chart of where meat comes from, how much meat is giant agribusiness versus small family farm versus like twee upper middle class Whole Foods type stuff?
Yeah, so when it comes to chicken and pork, it's 99% factory farmed. Now, the industry will say, Tyson Foods will say, all of our individual contract growers are family farmers. They'll say they have a family, so they must be a family farmer. But these are guys who are effectively employees of Tyson, except Tyson doesn't make them employees; it makes them independent contractors. Okay. And they're presiding over exactly that kind of an indoor factory setup that you've seen before. So it's just a tiny fraction of the meat that's still coming from independent family.
So
farmers.
Basically, if I'm at a restaurant and I'm ordering chicken. Unless the restaurant owner comes out and says the chicken was named Derek, like unless the owner actually raised the chicken, it's from a big factory farm. 99% chance it went through this process that we're talking about of genetic monstrosity kept in a microwave-sized cage that was dipped in the boiling electrical thing.
That's right. I mean, there are a couple exceptions. If you see Nyman Ranch pork, for instance, on a menu, that will be from that 1% of independent family farms. Or if you see that it says free range on the menu, then it might really be free range.
Okay.
But it's that's all the 1%. So if it doesn't say anything, it's factory farmed.
Right. Okay, that makes sense too, because if I'm a restaurant, it's in my business to put a little subheading under that of, by the way, this is free range, so it's guilt free. You can eat it, right? Because it's just one more reason to eat this thing. So presumably, if it is, it's going to be in it, and if it's not, then it wasn't factory farmed. So you have a pretty good idea of knowing. That's great. Okay, so noting all of this, a lot of the counter to becoming vegetarian, I think would part of it would be, well, it's too expensive to become vegetarian. Hamburgers are very cheap, and they are. Like if you go to McDonald's, like we're in this weird period in our history where fat people tend to be poor, rich people tend to be thin. First time in human history this has ever happened, and part of that is that you can go to McDonald's and get a really calorically dense meal for like $2. It's really, really cheap. I have heard as a counter to this, however, that is not an accurate representation of the actual value of meat nor the market, that we have so many subsidies going in via the Farm Bill that were you to remove the subsidies and have meat operate on a free market, that it would actually be much more expensive than it currently is, and we would consume less of it. Is any of that true?
It's a mixed bag. So it's certainly true that the government throws a lot of money at farm subsidies, and those farm subsidies do bring down the price of corn and soy, which are the primary grains being fed to chickens and pigs. Now, at the same time, most countries around the world are doing the same thing and subsidizing corn and soy. So if the US government removed its subsidies, it might not actually change the price of meat that much because these commodity prices are now global.
So it's an indirect thing. It's not that we're throwing price. We're not giving big sums of money to chicken farmers. We're giving money to feed farmers. And if we cut that out, they would just import feed from Mexico or from Honduras or from some other place. So that probably wouldn't affect things.
That's right. And it varies by industry, actually. So the dairy industry has been very successful in lobbying for all kinds of direct subsidies. So they've got price supports. If they produce too much milk one year, it gets bought out by the federal government and dumped on local school districts. They've got their whole set of subsidies. Now, the chicken and pork industries, they're more reliant on indirect subsidies. So they're more reliant on, they get really cheap grain, and they don't have to pay for any of the other things that people normally have to pay for. So I think, one example would be what happens with all the waste. Well, if you're a city, you have wastewater standards you have to meet. Now, if you're a chicken or a pig factory farm, you just dump it in the local waterway. And if they had to pay the same to treat their waste the same way a city did, that would dramatically increase the price of meat. So there are, they're getting around a lot of regulations that apply to other people. They're getting around that they're not paying for a lot of the harms they kind of inflict on society. But the pure difference from the grains may not actually be that big from the subsidies.
So wait, if I understand this, then I here in Austin, Texas, I cannot go poop in a lake. That is right. There's very good reasons that I'm not going to go poop in Lake Travis. Because everybody's swimming in it, and probably some of the water from the city comes from it. I don't know how much is well water versus river water, et cetera, et cetera. That doesn't generally apply to big agribusiness. If I've got a giant chicken feed place out in Carbuncle, Illinois, I just dump all the chicken shit into a river.
That's right. So it varies. I should say it can vary by state. Some states regulate this. The big ag states typically don't. And oftentimes it's indirect. So what they'll do is they'll say, well, we're not dumping the chicken shit right directly in the river. I mean, sometimes they do. But oftentimes they just dump it in a very high volume on all the surrounding fields. And so they say, it's fertilizer. But if you dump that much fertilizer on fields, the first time it rains, it's all just going to go off into the waterway. So if you look at somewhere like the Chesapeake Bay, very polluted bay, that's entirely thanks to the Maryland chicken industry. Same deal in the Iowa Des Moines Waterworks has real trouble getting clean water for people to drink. That's thanks to all the pig factory farms upstream. Primarily they're dumping it in very heavy volumes, and then they're waiting for the next rains to come and take care of it.
And I'm from Oklahoma originally, and it's my understanding, like if you go to Oklahoma, most of the lakes are green. There are one or two that are blue. Lake Hefner, beautiful lake, blue, but most of them are green. And the reason for that, as I understand it, is that there's so much chicken shit coming from Arkansas that gets by the time it gets to Oklahoma, it's not that the green stuff is the chicken runoff. It's that it's the algae that feeds off of it and the microbes that feed off of it. So all of the lakes in Oklahoma are green specifically because of this negative externality coming out of Arkansas. It's not something natural to the state. It's something that is a byproduct of this agricultural process.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, it's the same deal in the Gulf of Mexico. You've got this huge dead zone, which is basically we just have a ton of over nutrients runoff. So you've got all of this chicken poop, you got all this pig poop running off into the rivers and ultimately into the ocean, and that's great for things like algae. It's not so great for things like fish populations.
Okay, so if I understand you, then we're not really directly subsidizing big factory farms and slaughterhouses and such. We are subsidizing the food chain that reaches them, although because it's part of a fungible international supply chain, that probably wouldn't make a difference. But the principal financial contribution we're making is by effectively exempting big agriculture from the normal cost of negative externalities that we would impose on other sectors in society.
That's right. That's exactly right. I think it's the environmental externalities, it's the animal welfare externalities, it's the externalities for the people who live next door, and all of a sudden the air smells all the time. So they're typically getting out of the kind of regulations that apply to everyone else.
Okay. All right. So then if we were to continue this kind of price mechanism, I think I would be okay with having a law that said, look, you can't do anything to an animal you wouldn't do to a dog. I think I would be okay with that. If we said you can raise cows, chickens, pork, all that, you can totally raise them, you can totally eat them. They just have to have a life that's not significantly worse than a dog in an animal shelter. How about that? Animal shelter. It can't be worse than life for a dog in an animal shelter. I think I would be fine with that. And I think I could make a good moral argument that the gains that I get gastrointestinally of eating an animal is not sufficient to outweigh the suffering that it goes through. That said, I have no idea how much that's going to cost. So if we institute the Heaton no worse than dog shelter law, is it a thing where it's, meat goes up 10%, which I think we could take on the chin, or does it like triple in price? In which case, I do kind of feel bad now about forcing all of the people that are more poor than me to make that trade-off in terms of calories and income.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea for a law. I mean, I've often thought if we were just to all sit down and say, what do we think it's affirmatively okay to do to an animal? We can say, okay, we generally think it's okay to farm them. We generally think it's okay to maybe even keep them indoors. We think it's okay to do each of these things, and we're just going to allow all of those things, and we're not going to allow anything else. I think that would be an incredible change. I mean, I think what's happened instead is we've just said anything's on the table, anything's allowed, and it's only if something gets so specifically bad that everyone makes a fuss about it, then we'll just stop doing that one bad thing. And now in terms of what would be the cost of that, I think, I don't know the exact, I don't think anyone's ever really tried to cost out that kind of a measure. I can tell you there have been a series of laws recently saying animals just need to have enough room to stand up, turn around, and lie down. So this is far short of
I was going to say, that's way below the Heaton threshold of dog shelter.
This is way below the Heaton threshold.
The pig needs to be able to run around at least an hour a day in the Heaton rule.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So this isn't even saying they need to be able to run around. This is just saying their crate needs to be big enough that they need to be able to do a full 360 turn around. Mm-hmm. They just need to be able to turn their body around and stand up. And, the industry has said that will cost them about 20% more. That is a sign of how reliant they are on such extreme confinement that just allowing these animals to stand up, turn around, and lie down is 20%, according to them at least. Okay. And certainly is something that they've kicked up a huge fuss about. I
think I would be okay with that because we're not talking about all food being 20% more increase. I think that would be a very difficult thing to foist on people.
Right.
But saying meat specifically is 20% more expensive, but the trade-off is that we drastically reduce animal suffering. Like I'm trying not to be binary about this. I'm trying to look at this as trade-offs. And if I could get a ton of suffering mitigated by a modest price increase just on meat, I think I would be all right with that. Although, as you say, I guess we haven't done this industry by industry. Well, we can come back to regulations in a minute because I think that's going to be the controversial part of this: is how much are we willing to? My natural bearing is what rules am I going to inflict on somebody's private property or private business, and what costs am I going to inflict on other citizens? Those are all very legitimate things in terms of political economy, and I am conflicted on them. But what I'm not conflicted on, that I'd like to talk to you about for a minute, is what are we currently doing where What are government actions that we could remove that are coercive at the moment that are in place that are hurting animals? What I mean by that is it's my understanding that there are gag orders in place in various states where I, as a quote unquote journalist, could not go into a slaughterhouse and talk about it. I would be forbidden by law to do so, which I would say would be a great abrogation of freedom of speech rights. So is there anything like that that's currently on the books?
Yeah, so you're referring to there are these set of ag-gag laws. So basically in the 2000s, advocates, journalists started kind of going into farms, going into slaughterhouses, and just taking footage, just saying, hey, if this is what you're eating, you deserve to know where it came from.
Sure.
And that footage started to really take off, and it started to really threaten some of these practices within the meat industry. And so the meat industry's response was not, well, we'll get rid of the practices or change the practices. It is, we'll get rid of the transparency. We'll get rid of people being able to film this. And so in the biggest factory farming states like Iowa, they've passed laws that say if you take film in a slaughterhouse, if you take film in a factory farm, and if you have an intent to share that publicly and expose conditions, then that's a felony. And
really?
So far there have been... Yeah, so it's a pretty sweeping,
brazen violation of freedom of speech. Like, you were literally trying to make political speech about agricultural policies and advocate for changes in government, which is your God-given right as an American, and you just can't do it if you're reporting it on slaughterhouses and factory farming and stuff?
Yeah, this is the incredible thing, because of course they want to still be able to film for when, they want to take promotional film on their farm. And so that, they say that's not illegal. It's only illegal if you're going out and you're trying to expose this and you're trying to in some way harm the business, which is to say, any transparency they think is going to harm them. Now, these cases have been brought to court, and a number of courts have struck down these laws on First Amendment grounds.
Good.
But what happens every time they get struck down, the meat lobbyists go back to the legislature and they pass a law with slightly different wording. So, in the case of Iowa, I think they're on to their fourth ag-gag law now. The first three got struck down, but they just keep finding a way. They say, well, here was the part the court found objectionable. We'll try a slightly different tack this time around. So there's a sort of endless cycle of courts strike it down, legislature passes a new one. That law's in effect for a few years because this litigation takes time. And I think it's working pretty well for the industry.
No, that sounds right, because let's say I am I'm an animal rights journalist, or I'm just more likely I'm a journalist that's interested in animal rights. It's not my calling, but I'm doing it. And I'm going to go report, like a farmer's agreed for me to come on his property. He doesn't have a problem with it. But I am told by my attorney, look, you do this, you're going to be a felon. It'll probably get reversed, but it's going to be your life is going to be this litigation for the next 3 years. You're going to be indicted in court. It'll probably turn out okay. It's going to be such a big headache. Can you just talk about milk instead, or why solar panels are bad or good or whatever? So it's going to have a stalling effect, even if it doesn't hold up.
That's right. And, it's not just the ag-gag laws. We saw the same thing. I don't know if you remember the pink slime controversy. This was 5-10 years back, where ABC News basically said, look at the way what they're using in chicken nuggets. They're using this kind of pink-looking substance. And, they did a bunch of coverage about it. And in response, what the affected meat producers did is they went to, I forget if it was South Dakota or North Dakota, they went to the local courthouse where they knew they'd get a jury of all local farmers. And they sued for libel and defamation. And they ended up settling, I forget how much, but I want to say it was around $1 billion that it ended up settling for out of court. And ever since then, all of the big media houses have said, we're not going near this topic. We're not covering any of it because it's just too risky. We'll get slapped with a huge liability. And so the strategy of the industry has very much been, we've got laws to criminalize it, and if we don't have laws to criminalize coverage of it, then we'll find a way to scare you with defamation. We'll find a way to scare you with all kinds of other claims.
That sounds like some real intense crony capitalist bullshit trammeling First Amendment rights. So I think there will be a very broad consensus of listeners of the show that is some malarkey right there that we should get rid of. And then I think in Oklahoma, where I'm from, I believe there have even been laws put in place that you can't fundraise for animal activism in the state. Like it's, and I don't know how they do this, but it's, if I formed a super PAC called Heaton's, dog shelter threshold, and my goal is just no animal in Oklahoma is treated worse than a dog in a dog shelter, I could not legally raise money in Oklahoma for this aim. Am I right about that? Or are there laws in place in states?
I think they've tried, but I don't think they've succeeded.
Okay,
So
good.
I think Oklahoma in particular, there was the former. I think it was the Attorney General, Scott Pruitt, who went on to be the EPA administrator.
Oh, yes. Scott Pruitt, a huge proponent of the Commerce Clause. Scott Pruitt, a lifelong, diehard, gadfly Republican, whenever another state does something that pisses him off, like Colorado selling marijuana or California having rules on the meat that it has, he would come in and invoke the Commerce Clause, because to be very clear on this, Scott Pruitt does not believe in federalism at all. Sorry, from Oklahoma. I just had to get that out of my system. Please continue.
No, and it's perhaps not surprising that he also really hates animal welfare advocates, and he, there was a push in Oklahoma first to try and ban some of the most extreme confinement practices. And then there was a push to say, so the meat industry started this right to farm initiative, which would have preempted the right of any locality to do anything on their own to regulate, the environmental harms of factory farming. And Scott Pruitt was, of course, strongly behind this initiative. Now it lost, and that really annoyed him. And so his response was to try and say, you can't fundraise for anything in Oklahoma. And he launched all these sort of retaliatory investigations of every animal group in Oklahoma. I'm happy to say my sense is that now that he's gone from office, that is kind of that's all gone with him. But there was certainly a big attempt to do that.
I'm very glad to hear that he's gone from office, and I hope he is out of the country as well. The thing that I find odd about those ag gag laws is I'm not a vegetarian, but I think if I were to actually take my ethical prescripts and run them to the end, I think I would be a vegetarian. And I'm capable of introspectively looking at myself and saying, I'm just talking about me. I, Andrew Heaton, am kind of a hypocrite. And I kind of need to come to terms with that and either go, yep, I'm needlessly inflicting suffering on animals, or I need to become, that's just me, right? But when I talk to other people, I find that the idea of vegetarianism or veganism or whatever is so visceral to the identity that when we start talking about you should or you shouldn't eat meat, people get very defensive. But when we're talking about things that mitigate suffering, I think most people that I know that eat meat, again, I'm a meat eater, most people that eat meat, if they were to watch a documentary on YouTube that showed slaughterhouse practices, factory farming practices, and they went, option one, you can get a chicken that's horribly tortured. It costs $5. Option two, this chicken's not tortured. It costs $6. I think the vast majority of people that were capable of doing so would be willing to pay $1 extra for non-tortured meat. I think, I don't think that this would even crater the meat industry. I think that people would be willing to take that cost on as consumers, and so I'll pay $2 extra to know that the cow was not tortured endlessly.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think a huge problem here is the total lack of transparency. So people, when they're getting the cheaper chicken, there's no, image up or sign up saying, hey, here's how it was treated. And I think if there was accurate disclosure on pack, if it said, hey, this is the factory farm chicken, and here's an image of how its life was, here's what it looked like before it was killed, I think a lot of people would go for the slightly more expensive, higher welfare chicken. But of course, the industry doesn't want that disclosure, and quite the opposite. You'll often find the cheapest chicken has a label on it that says from a family farm, humanely raised, 100% all natural. Now, all of those things are totally meaningless. Okay. That they're unregulated terms. But when you've got those kind of labels on there, it's very hard to go and pay $1 extra or $2 extra for the higher welfare chicken. You feel like a sucker. I mean, is it really any better? And it's hard to know what to trust in that situation.
Well, I want to make sure I understand. So, family farm is a technicality most of the time, right? This is a family that is contracted by a giant. They're doing like a franchise. So whatever they're doing, Tyson's or whoever is coming in and telling them how to do it, and they're part of this big apparatus. It's not like they're going out and singing "Oh, What a Beautiful Morning" from Oklahoma, and then raising their chickens, and then they take them to the market, and then a guy from Tyson's negotiates with them. That's not what's going on. So family farm is a meaningless term in terms of buying stuff at a grocery store. Humane, I guess humane is a subjective term. What I would consider humane might be radically different than what somebody else considers humane.
That's right. And, there are some meaningful certifications. So if you see on there, certified humane means something. Okay. Global Animal Partnership certified also means something. But you need to know about the individual certifications, because the industry's also got a whole bunch of meaningless certifications. Mm. So the industry throws on there all of its own American Humane, Heartland certified. doesn't mean a thing.
Heartland certified means somebody in the middle made money on it, right? Is that what that means? That somebody in a state that's in the middle of the country has some stock options from it. All right.
That's right. So it's the industry has very cleverly worked out that most people are not paying a lot of time to this topic. They're not going around researching the exact standards for each one of their purchases, nor could they. And as a result, it's they've got this whole kind of profusion of labels. And I think really the only thing you can do is do a bit of research on your own, find a few labels you trust in, and actually stick to those if you can.
What about like with eggs? There's regular eggs, there's cage-free eggs, and there's some other category. I can't remember. If I'm buying eggs at my grocery store and I wanted to I'm willing to pay $2 extra. I'm doing well enough that I'll pay $2 extra to not inflict harm on chicken. What would the terms that I would look for in a grocery store be?
Yeah, and those terms actually mean something, thankfully, when it comes to eggs. So cage-free is the first thing to look for. So if it doesn't say anything, it came from a battery cage, it came from one of these, cramped cages I'm describing. Cage-free means the hens weren't in cages. They have about 3 times as much space as their cage as so the cage hens turn around. They can turn around. They can move throughout a building. So they're still in a warehouse-like building, but they can move around. They can typically perch. They can move up and down, which is something that seems kind of important to hens. And they can peck around and scratch around. They're still crowded. It's still it's still probably not a hen nirvana, but it's not bad. And if you want to go up beyond that, then free range should mean they had access to the outdoors. Now, there's a little bit of back and forth on whether producers let them out all the time and that kind of thing, but it should mean they were able to go outside. Pasture raised is kind of the top of the range, and that means that they're genuinely outside most of the time. But cage-free really is the big starting point. I mean, I'd say for someone who's just looking for one thing, look for cage-free. Make sure it wasn't kept in a cage.
Okay, so this might be another area where I'm more in favor of proactive government regulation. I tend to be very regulatory skeptic, and I tend to be very, very market-oriented guy, right? I have much less of a problem with government sort of adding information or transparency. So I brought on Cass Sunstein a couple of years ago. I don't know if you know Cass Sunstein.
Sure.
Fascinating dude. When he was the head of OIRA, one of the things that he put in was a law that when you sell refrigerators now in the United States, you have to have a tag on the front that tells you the price tag of the refrigerator, but also the estimated electrical costs over 5 years. So that just as a consumer, I can now look at the refrigerator and go, oh, this costs $200, that one costs $300, but I can see directly beneath that, oh, over 5 years, the $300 refrigerator is going to use far less electricity. It's going to cost me less in the long run. You can make whatever kind of refrigerator you want. We're not telling you can't make the cheap refrigerator. We're not taking consumers' abilities away to buy the cheap refrigerator. What we are doing is some kind of informational mandate where everybody has that information to work on. I think I would be fine with that, of having, we wouldn't use the word torture, but we would need a word to be like, this is the base level horrible stuff. This is the intermediate, it might even be that of cruelty rating, low, medium, and high. And have people be able to do that and go, oh, green. I only buy green, minimal cruelty products, and have that on there.
Yeah, this is something they've actually already done in Germany.
Really?
So Germany has a tiered system, and it says, this is level 1, and it's pretty easy to look up what level 1 means. And then, this is level 2, this is level 3, and this is what each of those standards means. And I think there's a lot to be said for it. I mean, at the very least, if an egg's from a caged hen, it should just say caged on it. It doesn't need to say anything more than that. It could just say it's from a caged hen. Factual information. I think that even just stopping the industry from putting meaningless labels on their products would probably go a long way. I mean, even just saying that there's a truth in advertising, that if you're going to say there's an image of an outdoor hen on this carton, the hen should have gone outdoor once in its life. If this is going to have all natural, then it probably shouldn't come from a caged, crated animal. So I think there's some pretty basic truth and transparency, and I think that's a huge challenge for a consumer trying to make a more ethical choice. It's really hard to know what to trust, and industry likes it that way.
What about I brought up my local nemesis Scott Pruitt a minute ago, and his reliance on the Commerce Clause to subvert state rights. It's my understanding that this does happen. So California has California, if I'm not getting this wrong, California doesn't have a lot of pork grown in the state. It's not a pork-producing state. It brings in the pork from Iowa and other states like that. But they tried to put in a law saying any pork you bring into California has to meet this minimum threshold of, pig can run around or turn around 3 times, something like that. The agricultural states are trying to knock out those individual state reforms through the Commerce Clause. Am I right in thinking that?
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And the good news from from the pig's perspective is that the pork producers had brought a major lawsuit against California, saying California has to let in our pork no matter how it was produced. California can't have any standards of its own. And the Supreme Court just rejected that lawsuit. So the Supreme Court just 2 weeks ago upheld California's law, said, California can set whatever standards it wants. Any state should be able to set whatever standards it wants. And if Iowa pork producers don't want to sell to California, then that's their decision. That's fine. But yeah, there's certainly this attempt from industry to nationalize the lowest common denominator, to say, we know that we can prevent any federal regulation around this. So now what we need to do is knock out any state regulation, and then there'll be no regulation whatsoever. And that's been the goal. That's been pretty clear. And the industry has now said, well, we failed to win at the Supreme Court. We've got lots of allies in Congress. We're going up to Congress and we're going to try and pass this as a federal law, and then we'll knock out all the state laws that way. So the industry's pursuit of stopping animal welfare laws will never end.
Okay, this is great. So far, you've not tripped any of my commie detection wires. I was wondering if there was going to be this moment where you were like, and also everybody has to go to Sarah Jessica Lawrence College and take a class in animal welfare. And also we're banning, we haven't had this. So far the bits that I have zero problem with whatsoever are these ag laws are, in my opinion, extremely anti-American, corporate cronyism, and anti-freedom of speech. I think everybody listening to the show would be on board with that. Allowing for state experimentation as opposed to one-size-fits-all federal solutions. I think most people would be okay with that. I don't know how the listenership feels, but I am okay with informational transparency laws or informational consumer laws in place. And that seems like a good way to just empower the consumer to pay $2 extra to not buy tortured meat. That all sounds good. Yep. Now let's get into the stuff that is going to make me more conflicted in terms of regulation. And this is I am telling your business what to do. It's not just we have options as consumers, but I'm saying the Lewis Bollard farm has to have a water slide for the chickens or whatever, right? So what kind of things would, if President Heaton becomes the leader of the country and I make you the Secretary of Agriculture, what are you pushing? What are you trying to do to benefit animal welfare throughout the country?
Yeah, I think it's getting rid of practices that the vast majority of people would already tell you they don't believe in. So, that's where we come back to that test where if you just said the pig needs to have a life about as good as a dog in a shelter. Mm-hmm. We're not going for anything crazy. We're not going for the water slides. Yeah. We're just going for keep it out of a crate. It shouldn't be in an immobilizing crate. It should be able to turn around. It should be able to lie down. It should be able to stand up. We should get rid of the painful mutilation. So, they castrate piglets without pain relief. Mm. Now, why do they do that? Well, it's cheaper. You'd have to
pay for the pain relief. Yeah.
That's right. And so, say, no, you got to pay for the pain relief. You got to, that's something I think, again, most people would be shocked if they went to their veterinarian with their dog and he said, I'm saving money. We're not gonna use pain relief this time around.
That's a great point. I've been dealing with a lot of dog stuff here recently. And if the vet went, all right, here's your menu of options. This one is anesthetic, and it's $2 extra. This one's without anesthetic, and it's $2. I'd be like, I am astonished that these are even options that you're giving me.
That's right.
That not giving my dog anesthetic for surgery is an available option because it's cheaper.
That's right. Yeah, and I think a lot of these things, you'd even find people in industry who would say, yeah, it'd be good if there was that general requirement. Right now, if you give anesthetic to your piglet when it's castrated, you're a sucker because you're paying a cost your competitor didn't have to pay, and they're going to be able to undercut you slightly in the marketplace. But if you had some basic standards, you said, so no, if you're going to do painful mutilations, there needs to be pain relief. Okay. If you're going to keep an animal confined, it needs to be able to move around, turn around. Ideally, it needs to be with a few other animals of its own kind so it can have some kind of basic interaction. You'd probably say, the ideal, maybe you give them a little bit of straw to move around on. Again, we're not talking about crazy, things.
Just not being in a jail cell, having something approximating habitat.
That's right, exactly. Take it away from what we've got right now, which is solitary confinement, to Give animals a little bit of habitat, a little bit of interaction with other animals. Give them something they can do all day, basically. Okay. And I think that would go a huge way to improving the lives of a huge number of animals.
Awesome. It's again, being from Oklahoma, there's a town where I learned to drink wine. Why my wine palate is screwed up forever is I learned to drink wine in Slaughterville, Oklahoma. And every 5 to 6 years, not Greenpeace. What's the group that's very pro-animal that does big flashy things? I can't.
Oh, PETA.
Yeah.
PETA.
Every 5-10 years, PETA comes in and demands that Slaughterville change the name of the town. And Slaughterville will just kind of go, okay, once again, we're named after a guy named Frank J. Slaughter. We don't have any slaughterhouses in town. We've like Rose Rocks and wine. These are the two things we have.
Right.
And so there's this, like, being a middle American, there's this tendency to look at animal welfare and see it associated with the kind of crazy, oblivious stuff. And what you're saying doesn't strike me as nuts. It doesn't strike me as crazy. Although I do come back. Do you have any idea, like, if we were to put these policies in place, do you have a ballpark of what percentage would a change in price for meat? Like, would it be 20%? Would it be higher? Is there any way to know?
I don't know for those specifically. So I'll tell you, going from cage to cage-free for egg-laying hens, that increases the cost of production by about 20%. Okay. But that's not the retail. So the retail price, the estimate is it's about a penny extra per egg. So, you're talking about it does because the production price is actually very low for eggs. And so increasing by 20%,
got it. Okay.
Once they get passed through the chain. Now, what happens in practice is higher welfare products get a huge retail markup. So it's used as a price differentiation tool. It says the retailers say, well, if you want this higher welfare stuff, you've got more money, don't you?
Wow.
So we're going to use this to get a little more out of you. But the actual difference.
Wait, so when I'm buying the cage-free eggs at the grocery store and I'm paying the $2 extra, it only costs them like a nickel. But I'm all right. I'm still willing to do it. But this is interesting to know that it's not that the cost is being inflated due to the label.
And that's going to change. So one of the big things we've seen in recent years is the egg industry moving away from cages to cage-free. There's been a lot of consumer pressure, a lot of retailer pressure. And so you've already got some of the biggest retailers like Costco is already gone completely cage-free. So they're not selling any caged eggs at Costco anymore. And when they did that, they made cage-free the new commodity, the new standard product. And so they brought the prices down on cage-free, and now you pay a premium if you want free range or you want pasture-raised. But so what you see is once you bring in that new standard, if it becomes the true new standard, well, they'll find a way to make that cheap. It won't be quite as cheap as the old standard, but it's not a big difference. The big difference is coming from the markup, coming from the things where they're saying, we know you can pay more.
Yeah. Again, none of this strikes me as like life-shattering, life-altering, like, everybody has to eat bugs and nobody can eat cows. Like this
Right.
This strikes me. And I also suspect the vast majority of people, if you gave them torture and non-torture with a $2 difference, would be happy to pay the $2 extra for this, that it's not absolutely nuts. Well, then noting all of this, one of the other things that I think is, when I have these conversations and people get very visceral about, like, I don't want to do any of this, I think one of the impediments that I find is when you start to think about the actual suffering that's going on with animals writ large, it's mind-boggling. Like, it really hurts to think about that. Like, 'cause again, I love dogs, and like, dog fighting should absolutely be illegal. But then I start thinking about, like, how many pigs are on the planet and what they're going through. It's easier for me to just wall that off and not think about it. So how bad is it? And is it getting better or worse?
It's getting worse, unfortunately. So the scale is mind-boggling. So in the US at any point in time, we have about 2 billion animals being factory farmed. Globally, that's about 25 billion animals being factory farmed at any point in time. And that's only increasing. It's particularly as countries like China and India get wealthier, they want to eat more meat. We're seeing the export of huge factory farming systems, often from big US companies. And we're exporting this globally. And so, there has been significant progress in getting people to care more about farm animals. There's been some initial progress on getting animal welfare standards in place. I mentioned companies like Costco moving away from caged eggs. But the reality is that globally, this is still a problem that's getting bigger. And it's going to keep on getting bigger.
The scale's getting bigger and the markets for meat are opening as other countries become more affluent?
That's right. As people get richer, they eat more meat, they eat more eggs. The world is thankfully getting richer. And so it's going to be a process of there is kind of this curve where as people get richer, first of all, they just eat a lot more of the stuff, and once they get a bunch richer, they start demanding changes, and they start saying, okay, I want to see this. I want to see how this has produced change. And so I hope we're going to move to that part of the curve where we're going to see people saying, okay, I'm wealthy enough that I can afford $1 extra for higher welfare product. And we'll start to see the industry moving in that direction.
I suspect you're right about that. I think that there's, I'm sure that there's an economic term for this, and I don't know what it is, where we move into the kind of fun craft, local bookstore kind of thing when we become more affluent. Like the local bookstores tend to do well in affluent neighborhoods, not in poor neighborhoods, right? The poor neighborhoods are going to have a big Barnes and Noble type thing, or did. Maybe now, Kindle has ruined all this. I don't know, but your affluent neighborhood's more likely to have the individual shop with personality because you're able to sustain that through your economy. I would think that food would probably be very similar to that, where understandably right now, if we were to go to Southeast Asia, where we're talking to somebody who maybe makes $8,000 a year, and we're like, by the way, you should pay an extra $1 on all of your food, I could understand why they would be reticent to that. But on my end, I've bought neckties for my dog. Like at that point where I've purchased neckties for my dog, I have some wiggle room in my budget to be able to take this stuff on the chin. So I'm willing to do that. Then to bring it back then, because I'm most curious about laws that we could put in place or laws that we could remove that would benefit animal welfare. For people just on an individual level, on a consumer level, not in terms of what we would do as a regulatory apparatus in the country, but what I can do as a grocery shopper or a patron of restaurants. What would you recommend for consumers to do just to if there's low-hanging fruit we can do to limit animal suffering, what is it?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing is to start looking at labels and to start asking questions. So to start saying, hey, what are the standards behind this? Is this just factory farmed? Is this not? One place, and I know it's more expensive, but one place that is pretty good on this is Whole Foods Market. Okay. So Whole Foods Market across the board has high animal welfare standards to even get in the store, and so you can be relatively assured that anything that's being sold there is significantly better. It's true at other stores too. It's just harder to find, right? It's just harder to work out what's meaningful. But this is where looking for a label like certified humane, looking for cage free or free range or other higher welfare products. I think that's the first thing that I'd encourage people to do. And then making clear, the more that people ask restaurants, retailers, hey, do you sell anything that's higher welfare? Why are you just selling factory farmed meat? The more they're going to respond, and the more that they're going to start offering these products too. So that's the other thing. So
certified humane, that's a thing to look for. Pasture raised for eggs is best. Cage free is okay. If it doesn't say anything, it's horrible. There was a certain ranch or something you mentioned earlier on in the episode where if the chicken comes from this ranch, it's okay.
So Niman Ranch is a association of independent pork producers, and they all follow higher welfare standards.
Oh, so I could eat pig if I get it from Niman Ranch, because it's delicious.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's right. And so Niman Ranch, I think they have a few hundred farms across the country now, and they I think they just do pork, but they have there are a few chicken producers too that are sort of higher welfare in the same vein.
Okay.
So you can find a few of these producers. You do have to just look out for the names, and it can sometimes be a little hard.
Is it Niman, Nimen, something like that?
Niman.
Okay, that's fine. I can Google that. I can find that. And then Whole Foods, there's just a higher floor in terms of animal suffering. Noting that chickens get the worst of all this. Are their chickens okay, or are they just less horrible?
It's all going to depend on people's individual standards, right? But they have standards in place, which is not true of most of the chicken industry. So they have standards. They've committed to improving the genetics. So there are breeds of chicken that just have far better genetics, that they can still stand up, they can still live,
better quality of life while they're going on,
and so Whole Foods is committed to moving in that direction. They haven't actually gotten there yet, but they're committed to moving that way. So are some of the other companies you might expect. So like Chipotle is another company that has higher animal welfare standards. So is Panera actually, and so some of the slightly upmarket sort of fast casual chains tend to also be trying to do better on this stuff. Okay. But, I do think one of the important things is just for people to say to a company, hey, what are you doing? And the answer might be they're already doing something, or, the answer might be that hearing from people constantly asking is actually the impetus they need to move in a better direction.
Well, I think that the consumer element has actually been far more powerful in America than the regulatory element thus far, because
right.
I don't believe we have that many state or federal regulations in place in terms of agricultural animal cruelty. We have dog and cat laws, but the laws are very scant. But at the same time, though, you mentioned Tyson's. Like Tyson's, apparently, when people go, I would be willing to pay you more for higher, lower cruelty to animals, or alternately, I am going to go to the company that has the cruelty-free animals. That seems to actually have a push the needle effect on the industry.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. So I think one of the more exciting trends we've seen in recent years is companies taking it upon themselves to raise their standards. So we've seen companies like, I mentioned Costco. I think this has been true of some of the big fast food chains as well. They've said, we need to have basic standards. Our customers expect this of us. And first, we're going to get rid of the caged eggs. We're going to move towards cage-free. And that's, even McDonald's now is predominantly using cage-free eggs. So that's a trend we've seen across the industry. The next big trend has been, let's do something about the treatment of these meat chickens. Let's move to higher welfare genetics. That's a process we're seeing taking place. And you're seeing, Tyson has not done much on this, but their competitor, Purdue Farms, has done a lot of progress on this and is really forging a path as a higher welfare producer. So you are seeing the market respond to this demand from consumers. And I think the important thing is that people just keep asking about it, because that's what these companies need to hear, is they need to hear that there actually is the demand.
Fantastic. I have learned a lot. I think I'm pretty much giving up chicken. And I have really enjoyed talking to you. Lewis Bollard, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be on the show.
That's the show. Thanks for listening. Thank you, media assistant Eric Stipe, who edited today's program. Thank you, Kevin MacLeod, who wrote the music Shades of Spring used during the Patreon plug. And on that note, thank you, glorious patrons of the Orphanage, who make the whole thing possible. And you can join them and support the show by going to patreon.com/Andrew Heaton. Until next time, I've been Andrew Heaton, and so have you.